Um, okay, great. So we're going to get started. We have a very exciting webinar here. The program is the Diversity Imperative, How to Become a Diverse, Equitable, and Inclusive Not-for-Profit. Our presenters will talk about basic DEI terms, assessing your not-for-profit, and how to become an inclusive organization. My name is Lovepreet Buttar. I'm a partner here at Mercadien. We are a full-service accounting firm. I work with a lot of not-for-profits myself, providing assurance, tax, and consulting services. And really, I'm just happy to host our presenters here today. So I'll quickly introduce them, and then I welcome them to add on any color when they do their presentations. We have Ira Weissman with us, who's a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, who has over 40 years of experience in project and program management, quality, and training. He has a passion for not-for-profit work, where he has over 20 years in high-level volunteer positions. Ira's consulting firm, Idea Innovations LLC, seeks to help businesses, government agencies, and not-for-profits become more effective, efficient, and successful. So Ira's really going to be taking us through and talking about those basic DEI terms. What does that mean? And like I said, how to assess your organizations and how to become an inclusive organization. We also have with us the founding partners of Fleming Petenko Law. So Noel Fleming focuses his practice on servicing the legal needs of not-for-profit organizations, primarily in the areas of corporate law and governance, charitable trusts, federal, state, and local tax matters, fiduciary duties, charitable fundraising, and related matters. He regularly acts as outside general counsel to a variety of not-for-profit organizations, including publicly supported charities, private foundations, mental health organizations, social services providers, museums, educational institutions, and healthcare facilities. So really all things not-for-profits. We also have with us Casey Petenko, who focuses her practice on advising a variety of tax-exempt organizations, including private foundations, public charities, and donor-advised funds. Immediately prior to forming Fleming Petenko Law, Casey worked for another boutique law firm, providing legal advice and services to not-for-profit entities. She frequently speaks on legal matters related to the operation of non-profit organizations. She's also an adjunct professor at Villanova University. I don't know how all of you do what you do, because your bios are very impressive. And like I said, feel free to add in anything I may have missed. And I'm gonna turn it over to Ira to start the presentation.
Thank you, Lovepreet. And just to add on, among other things, I am a board member of the Nonprofit Development Nonprofit Development Center of Southern New Jersey, where I teach a number of courses through the Nonprofit Development Center at Camden County on nonprofits, everything from strategic planning to obviously diversity, equity, and inclusion, succession planning, measurements, et cetera, et cetera. I am also the chairman and co-founder of the Camden Youth Aviation Program. So let's jump into, what does diversity mean? If we look here, you see what most people commonly think about the various diverse groups, everything from gender to religion to race, ethnicity. But as you dig down further, you'll find a great variety. And it's a good thing, because each and every person brings their own perspective to an organization, and that's what gives organization strength. Next slide. Definition, and this is one of the things we want to try and accomplish today, which is to give everybody a common language. So often with nonprofits, everybody thinks they understand what the goals, what the mission is. But when you get them together and ask the question, what is it we're doing? You get a lot of different answers. So we want to get a basis for everybody to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. and I promise this is going to be one of the few slides that I read. Diversity is the condition of having or being composed of different elements. Variety, especially the inclusion of different types of people, such as people of different races or cultures in a group or an organization. And this comes out of the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Next. We have a poll for you. How does your nonprofit rate on diversity? With 1 being not diverse, up to 5 being very diverse. So take a second and just answer the question. It is completely anonymous, so you don't have to worry somebody coming back and saying, you said this about our organization. And we'll share that with you in a few seconds. Okay. And the winner at 44% is everybody's kind of in the middle. We had a few or people come back and say, not very much. And then some that said kind of, then yeah, we're in the middle. And then we had 13% say, yeah, we're very good at it. And you'll find there's a full spectrum of answers here. What we find, next slide. These are from 2017. And in one, you're seeing that on a nationwide study, 89% of the nonprofit chief executives are white. 85% of the board members are white. 27% of the nonprofit boards are entirely white. And 63% of board chairs are male. If you look at the Battaglia Winston study, very similar type responses. If we go to the next slide, this is from the Center for Nonprofits, where for New Jersey, the leadership, 79% are white, 21% are African American, but it kind of gives you a feel for the overall status of diversity within the world of nonprofits. What does it tell you? We need to do better. Okay, next. Why is it important? What's the advantages of it? What it does, and I said this earlier, and you're going to hear it again and again and again, it brings different perspectives. It gives you a better understanding of your clients. I know from conversations that I've had with individuals in different ethnic groups, things I see one way, they see entirely different. You need those perspectives. It helps to build the quality of your decisions. It helps you in working with your clients because they are a diverse group of individuals. And one of the strongest statements I've heard of late, it allows people to bring their true selves to the work. It helps them, when you feel good about yourself and where you are, you're more creative, you're more diligent, you're more passionate about the work you're doing. But if you feel like, hey, I'm here, I'm doing it, but I really am not involved, they don't respect me, you're not going to be giving your best. All right, let's move on. Equity, as it says down below, equality doesn't mean equity. We know, and we've heard a lot about this of late, is there's been issues where people have not been given an opportunity, and we have to provide the ability for them to get on an equal footing with everybody else. And equity ensures that people are treated fairly under the organization. And it corrects for the inequalities that people have had to deal with in the past. And just if you think about it, people may not have been given the training, or they may not have been given the support. So just saying, well, we've opened up this position for everybody, that's true. But did you put people in a position to succeed? Again, equity is helping them to achieve what should have been there in the first place. Next. We've heard a lot about equity, especially health equity during the coronavirus, but there's the gender equity, racial equity, and economic equity, where it's getting people where they are now at an equal level across the board. And we've seen it in some of the most recent discussions about salary, around especially access to medical treatment. And the idea is that we want to bring everybody up to that same level. Next. The graphic kind of says it. Inclusion, it's where people are warmly welcome, they're valued, they are part of the organization. And it just, the slide just shows you the steps from exclusion all the way to the inclusion. And if I take you down to the graph below, or excuse me, the table below, you have diversity versus inclusion. When we think about diversity, it's about counting people or counting things, but inclusion is you're valuing them. For diversity, we talk about it, but with inclusion, you're giving voice to and listening to people with different perspectives. And then the last part is diversity is about differences. Inclusion is about the equity. It's giving those people an equal opportunity and helping them to succeed. Bias. We all have them, whether we recognize them or admit to it. But it's how you feel about something and or a group. And usually it's considered to be unfair. Usually it's viewed in a negative manner. Every day we're determining or we're recognizing additional biases. Studies, there's at least 175 different biases out right now, and every day somebody recognizes a new one. Usually we hear the phrase stereotypes. And stereotypes is you're taking one characteristic and applying it to a whole group of people. And is this a good thing? No. And you have to try and step away from those stereotypes when you see the individual themselves and the strengths and the potential of that individual. I said I work with Camden Youth Aviation Program. Camden, as you may or may not know, has had a really rotten reputation. But when you get down and meet the kids that are there, you step back and say, wow, these young people are absolutely great. And they don't match up with the stereotypes that you see painted with the gangs or all the other things that go with a low income or inner city type of youth. Next slide. Unconscious bias. This is where you don't even recognize that you have some negative feeling around someone, but it's there. Another name for it is implicit bias. It may be, and you see somebody stepping away from somebody who may be overweight or of a different racial background. I'm being very careful with my words because I don't want to offend anybody. And we all carry these types of biases with us and we don't recognize it. Intersectionality is where multiple biases come into play, where somebody may be of a different racial or ethnic group, and they may also be female. And this may determine that they're not considered for certain positions, or they may receive a lower pay. And it's where multiples biases all heap up on a single individual. Next. These are just a list of some of the biases that are out there. We've heard the most recently about racial bias. During the past month, the religious bias has come to forefront. Sexual orientation. We've heard people speak out about that. Do you have the opinion that if somebody has a disability, that they can't do something? Right now, one of the organizations, scientific organizations, are finding out that some young people, with special needs, because of their ability to focus, it makes them very good at recognizing patterns. And the list goes on. There is a project out of Harvard called Project Implicit, and there's a hyperlink down at the bottom of this slide, which will take you to this Project Implicit, and it allows you to understand your own biases through some self-testing. All right, next. We have this occurring every day. Microaggressions. That's where you get these insults or other put downs that occur based on who you are, your color, whether you're a male or a female, whether you're part of the LGBTQ population. And it just makes you feel marginalized. We talk about micro assaults. And there's symbols there. We've heard about nooses being at the Amazon center that's being developed, and they've shut that down. Or a swastika being painted on the side of the synagogue. Those are considered micro assaults. A micro insult is where you're sitting in a meeting and maybe one of the women are talking and all the male people who are there are now checking their phones and not paying any attention to what's being said. Or you've seen it happen where, what was it, Walmart, a couple months ago, took the locks off of African-American cosmetic products. That would be a micro insult. And then the micro invalidations is, I don't see any difference. You as an individual, you're just part of everything. Those things that make you special or different have no meaning. So you're saying, hey, so much of what is you has no importance. Next. Privilege, we've heard this. This is where you're afforded certain things where you've done nothing to earn them, but this is part of what a group receives, whether they've earned it or not. White privilege, we know that in many places, there are areas that African Americans aren't allowed, or when they walk in, that they're not served or they're not welcomed in many ways. And oppression, it's the social inequalities are being continued to exclude groups and people. Next slide. Other terms, protected classes, and this is a legal term where underemployment, you can't show any bias or actions against certain groups based on race, color, religion, creed, national origin, ancestry, sex, or age, physical or mental disability, whether they're a veteran, genetic information, or citizen. And this is a legal issue that's out there. So you cannot in any way act against people based on these factors. Next. Cultural appropriation. This is where you adopt something of another culture, although you don't support them. Right now, we're hearing it with one of the Kardashians and a commercial for tequila, where there isn't an appreciation for the culture, but they're showing it as part of a sales campaign, where appreciation is, this is interesting, and you start to gain an appreciation for that culture, and you start to respect and honor them. Go ahead. And this is the path from bias to allyship. And we're seeing a lot more of the allyship where people are respecting and fighting for the equality of different groups. So it starts out with denial. Oh, there's no differences. Everybody's the same, to defending your position. And then from there, the various steps from minimization to acceptance to adaptation. And then, yes, I am willing to go out and support this other group. And there's another phrase that's been used of late, which is accomplice also. Next slide. For those of you who are Star Trek fans, guilty. Diversity and inclusion doesn't mean assimilation, doesn't mean that you take on the characteristics of the organization. Diversity and inclusion means you get to come as yourself to bring your unique individual, your unique perspectives to this organization. Yes, you accept some of their mores, but you are still that individual, and you are there with whatever characteristics that make you unique. Next slide. So how do we get to this state of diversity? We have to know where we start. So we want to look at our organization. We want to figure out where the gaps are, and then from there, develop a plan to go forward. Make sure management, senior management, buys into this. Without them, you're not going to have a diverse organization. What's your policies and procedures look like? Do they create a barrier to becoming a diverse and inclusive environment? Then comes the hard part, changing the culture. And then asking some simple questions. How does diversity support our organizational goals? Putting the program in place, and then letting everybody, not just the workers, but also your stakeholders and your donors, understand what it is you're doing and showing where you're going and how you're doing and keeping that visible for everybody. And are you going to get it right the first time? No. So you're going to review and adjust. And then you want to be able to sustain and maintain your diverse organization. Next slide. So how diverse is your organization? What's your board look like? What's your leadership look like? Departments and staff and volunteers. And how do they compare to the general population, your local community? And oh, by the way, the people you serve. Because if you don't understand the people you serve, are you really helping them? And there may be unique issues out there. Next. When you're doing your assessment, you want to look at how committed is your organization to diversity? What's the leadership doing to foster it? When you hire, where are you advertising? Are you going out to just one group or one area? Are you looking at unique channels that might be able to bring in additional people, different diverse groups? How's your employees feel about diversity? Do they understand the importance of it? Human resources. What are they doing about your policies and procedures? Is there a way to report harassment? Is there a harassment policy? What training is being given, not just to the people, but to the senior levels? And your partnerships, do you have policies that seek to use African-American companies or women-owned companies? Are you partnering with the local community organizations so that you understand the communities that you're working with? These are all questions you want to be asking, and there's a much more in-depth, involved process. Next slide. Putting together your diversity team. You want to have a chief diversity officer or somebody who's going to be a champion. You want your board members, your managers, everybody at all levels. There should be representation, including your clients and your stakeholders. Why is that important? Because they will give you that outside perspective that you need to be in order to be successful. Next. You want to start by making sure everybody's the same page. Same thing we're doing here. Make sure that everybody at the senior level and the diversity team has a training. They understand what the basics are, what diversity, what equity, inclusion, why, what those are, and why they're important. And then you want to look at your assessment. And you don't want to just look at the assessment and say, oh, that's okay. It doesn't mean that much. You want to look at what's there and what isn't there too. And then you want to break up into small groups and start to develop your strategies to help your organization become a diverse and inclusive organization. Next. In reviewing your assessment, look at the top level, see where the similarities are, see where the differences are, and then drill down. And these are some questions you want to ask over on the right side of the slide. What's senior management look like? Are they all one group? Is clerical all female? Where do the underrepresented groups sit in the organization? Are they lower level? Are they early, mid, senior level? So on and so forth. But you want to start to ask these questions and look at your organization. Next slide. You want to put together a plan. And you want to make sure your policies and procedures are addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Build it into your bylaws. Make sure your management buys into this, because they are going to be the ones who are going to be telling the organization. make sure that you have goals in place. And when we talk about goals, we talk about SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time constrained. And make sure everybody understands them. And then you're going to work on changing that culture of your organization. Next slide. Look at your hiring practices. Is it transparent and unbiased? We know that there are filtering programs that most large corporations have. Are there anything that says, don't hire somebody with this ethnic sounding name? Or are there other things that prevent somebody from a different ethnic or diverse background from being hired? Look at your compensation processes and career growth. One of the things a lot of companies are doing now is, in addition to providing mentors for diverse members of the organization, they're providing champions, people who will state that person's case and fight for them, and then put in place the zero tolerance for any type of discrimination. And then create diversity committees and make sure that they have the ear of senior management, because just having the committees doesn't mean anything. You've got to be able to drive change with them. Next. Mindset, commit to action. Get your diversity, equity, and inclusion committee in place. Give it the task of putting together your goals and objectives, make people responsible for results. And oh, by the way, give them the necessary resources. Too many times somebody says, well, you're going to be responsible for diversity. They don't have the authority or the resources to make it happen. So you need to make sure that they do have that. Create accountability, make sure that they understand that results need to be delivered. You're going to regularly review the progress. And again, you're going to listen to your employees. And you always want to keep on making everything visible. You're going to look at those metrics, you're going to share them to see how you're doing, and you're going to adjust. Next slide. I said before, communicate, communicate, communicate. Seniors and middle management has to make the organization aware of the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Your messaging is going to be different depending on who you're talking to. So make sure you tailor that message that you're giving out. You want to make sure that people understand the training and get to the training and the awareness. You want to be able to show why it's important, the positive impact. And then again, using multiple methods to reach out to different people. Next slide. Review and adjust. Set your benchmark and goals. Look at whether you're meeting them. If you're not, look at how you can change it. And then audit your organization and the environment on a regular basis. Go back and talk to the people. See what their feelings are. Again, you want to look and find out whether or not you're having the impact that you were hoping for. If not, look to see how you can change it. Could be surveys, it could be one-on-one conversations. And if necessary, go back and reassess and find out why things aren't working. And again, keep it visible. Keep the organization aware of the status of where you are and the positives that are coming out of it. Next slide. Some of the common pitfalls. Oh, we hired so many of this particular group. We're done. And you don't look to see, is the organization really addressing diversity and inclusion. We brought in a bunch of consultants. They told us what to do, and they gave us this great report. And guess what? Nothing happened. Or 6 months after they left, you're back where you started from. Oh, it's just another program. It's the flavor of the week, and people never feel ownership of it. They never buy into it. When difficult questions come up, you get this silence. So there's no open dialogue. They're not willing to face the issue. Again, it comes back to leadership. If they're not invested, it's not going to happen. And usually what happens is they'll grab a minority member and say, you're responsible. And people see that and say, well, management hasn't bought into it. Why should we? Putting benchmarks in place are fine, but they've got to be realistic. And they have to reflect what the various groups that they're available, and you want to make sure that you do have a true number, true representation of the various minorities. And the last part is, hey, we hired so many people, we're done. No, you're looking at culture change. Culture change takes from 3 to 5 years. Next slide. And this is the hard part, which is building that diversity, equity, inclusion into all the key parts of your organization: vision, mission, core values. You saw a radical change in the environmental area where they found populations that lived in low-income areas were most infected by environmental polluters or poor environment. And it changed the focus of so many environmental groups. You want to make sure that you reinforce what you're trying to do, that respect, sensitivity, and empathy are key. You want to seek your talent from a wide variety of diverse groups. And you want to look at skills and abilities. You don't want to look at, well, what's the stereotype for this? And then you want to be able to listen to your diversity groups and look to see whether or not you're meeting your goals. And I believe that's my last slide. Casey, no, your turn.
Thanks, Iris. So again, my name is Noel Fleming from Fleming Petenko Law, where we represent nonprofit organizations. We're going to talk briefly a little about some legal considerations you might want to keep in mind, primarily from a corporate governance perspective, about how to try and build in DEI initiatives into your organization. So on the next slide, as Iris said, diversity is good. And even the legal system has recognized the value of diversity, as this quote from 2003 illustrates. It says the skills needed in today's increasingly global marketplace can only be developed through exposure to widely diverse people, cultures, ideas, and viewpoints. So obviously, by getting your organization the value of the input from a diverse population, it's going to make your organization better and more able to pursue its mission. So nonprofits especially, how can nonprofits that are dedicated to benefiting the public, how can they make this DEI a priority in their organizations? On the next slide, we're going to look briefly at, so one way at the outset to promote diversity is to make sure that there's a genuine willingness and consensus among the leadership to introduce diversity into your organization. And so this begins obviously with the board and the CEO and the other senior executives. And make sure that they have the willingness to do this and aren't just doing it to look good because it's the flavor of the day, as Ira mentioned. There's really good evidence to support the proposition that diversity brings better decision making into an organization, makes organizations better. So there's not just, don't just do this to look like you are doing the right thing today, but do it because it's going to make your organization much better, more efficient organization. One way you can do this, once you get the buy-in from the organization, is to make it a part of your corporate governance so that it's institutionalized within your organization and becomes a way of life. And it's not just something that's written down on paper that we'll file away till next year, but it becomes part of the organization and the way that your organization, your nonprofit, is going to make diversity, DEI, an ongoing part of the organization. As we say here, the next slide, bylaws. By incorporating various provisions into your bylaws, we would start with reviewing your bylaws, see where your bylaws are right now. Maybe it's worth putting some aspirational language in there, a commitment. This isn't going to happen overnight, but it's a commitment to making DEI something that's going to happen in your organization. Maybe there's deadline. Ira mentioned the SMART principles. So developing plans that will have measurable results, and there's a timeline built in there. So having a statement that we commit to, our organization is committed to having a representative board that looks like the constituents we serve, and understands the business that we are in. Provisions like selecting directors. So again, you want to make sure that your board reflects the constituency you serve. If an organization consists of all the same type of people, but it serves different types of people that's not reflective of its board, is it really serving those individuals the best that it can? Probably not. And so having a board that's very reflective of the constituents you serve is going to help. Some other provisions in the bylaws that can help increase these DEI initiatives is qualifications of directors. Sometimes we don't think, okay, we have a give or get policy. Maybe we have some educational requirements. Well, give or get doesn't work for everybody. We work with several organizations that require an annual financial contribution. Well, think about that. Does that automatically exclude some people from serving on your board, from wanting to serve on your board, from being able to serve on your board? So think about whether those kinds of automatic policies that you think are good for your board may not actually work in all cases. And so maybe they need to be on a case-by-case individualized basis as to whether someone is required to pay a certain fee. Increasing access to candidates through remote meetings. So most bylaws, most state statutes provide for meetings of boards by video conference, telephone conference, etc. Maybe have more board meetings by those media formats, on those media formats, because then you can get more participation potentially from a more geographic diverse population, but also people who will be able to help your organization. So it doesn't limit it to a certain percentage of people who might be able to help your board. You might want to, Ira mentioned this as well, appoint a diversity officer, someone who is going to be responsible for making sure that the diversity initiatives that your organization wants to implement will be followed up on and reported back to the board on an annual basis, perhaps as part of an annual DEI audit, which is going to help the organization understand where it is. Ira mentioned this at the outset. You want to know where you are right now, where you want to go, and where you are currently. So have somebody potentially who's appointed as a DEI officer who can report back annually or maybe more frequently to the board on how you are trying to meet these initiatives. And even though we mentioned certain very specific things your organization might want to look at here on the bylaws, not all of these will need to be suitable for every organization. So each organization is going to have to look at its own corporate governance structure, decide what may be good for it. But these are things to keep in mind that may be helpful in getting your organization into that mindset. And I think Casey's going to talk a little bit about some other corporate governance matters.
Yeah, so another way that you can use your bylaws to promote your DE&I plan is to incorporate a DE&I committee into your bylaws. So if it's in your bylaws as a standing committee, this kind of shows everyone that you have that upper level buy-in, that it's something the board supports, and that it's not just an initiative, it's actually going to be part of the nonprofit's organization, its culture going forward. So you can do this a few ways. You can put the specifics of it into your bylaws, or you could drop those into a separate committee charter document. And when I say specifics, I'm talking about what this committee is actually going to be responsible for. So what they're tasked with, the makeup of this committee. And that's going to really depend on your specific organization. So your size, for example, among other things. But really the makeup of this committee is going to be what makes the most sense for your nonprofit. For smaller nonprofits, this might only be your board of directors. If you're a larger nonprofit, this might be that chief diversity officer, if you have one, maybe someone from human resources. It might even include outside consultants to help share insight from outside your organization or maybe the local community. And Ira mentioned this, it's a great idea and we also recommend it, but you want to make this committee itself a diverse committee because you want people from all different levels of your organization. You want to make it clear that this organization not only has the support of leadership, but also that they have access to those senior level individuals that are the ones necessary to help implement these important changes. And some of the recommended responsibilities of these committees are on the slide. So you're going to promote training and events that are going to help either bring awareness to your nonprofit or increase awareness that might already be there. You're going to actively include board, staff, volunteers, pretty much everybody in these DE&I conversations and trainings because you want to make it a more inclusive conversation and extend that buy-in. And then you're going to review your policies and procedures. And so you're going to review what you already have in place to make sure that they serve in furtherance of this goal of promoting DE&I within the nonprofit. This also might require developing new policies and procedures. So organizations kind of run the spectrum on how they do that. Some have a standalone DE&I policy. Some have multiple policies to address this. So maybe a pay equity policy, non-discrimination and harassment, or equal opportunity and affirmative action policies. Still other organizations might decide to incorporate these DE&I goals into all of their policies wherever they see fit. And again, this is going to be something that it depends on your organization and what makes the most sense for you. But when we're looking at these policies, you want to make sure that they're transparent and unbiased. Do you have a procedure in place that will make it clear to everyone in the organization when there are opportunities available and what the steps are for advancement within your organization? Does your nonprofit succession plans aim at increasing diversity, or are they just keeping the status quo and not really looking at those DE&I goals from a long-term perspective? And where possible, you want to make sure that things such as performance evaluations are as consistent as they can be. And the last point on this slide, you're going to look at updating job descriptions because you want them to be more inclusive. So this could be something simple like looking at the word choice that you're using in them. So maybe instead of saying a position requires you to talk to clients, you could say this position requires you to communicate with clients. And it could just be a simple word change like that that could make candidates feel more included. Another thing that you should consider is, and this one I think is pretty basic, but we see it all the time. If your organization has this great D&I policy and culture, you want to make sure that you promote it. So put it on your website, put it in your job postings. If you have these policies on your website, drop a link to it in your postings. And that way interested candidates can be aware of it, and it can really draw the more people to want to be part of your nonprofits team. And I also talked about this one a bit in terms of reviewing your organization's DE&I program, but I'm mentioning it again because it also applies to these documents and policies. So outside of the DE&I framework, we are always recommending to our nonprofit clients that they should review their documents from time to time. Specifically, we mean your bylaws and your policies, but you want to make sure that these documents still make sense for your organization and they're still a good fit for you. So this is particularly important in the D&I world, to be reviewing your policies and procedures. You want to put into these policies a method for a periodic review, both of your D&I goals, but also of your policies. And you really want to ensure that there's some sort of accountability mechanism that's in place to help guarantee the success of your plan. And then the last part of it, you want to check in and see how your efforts are, whether they're working or whether they're not. And a great way to do this is to survey your employees. So survey them before you implement your program and then survey them after you implement your program to sort of gauge their perception of how things are within the organization. And one thing that we find is helpful is if you do this anonymously and you have open-ended questions or a comment section, typically you can get some more useful feedback as to how your program is actually working within your nonprofit. And with that, I'm going to flip it back over to Lovepreet to talk about her experience with implementing a plan.
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you to all of you. That was great. I think, getting to know all the terms and the basics, I think it can be pretty complex. So starting with that, background, so I think that was really helpful. And as I was listening to all of you, I was going through my head, as we are in the middle of formally kicking off, I should say, our DE&I initiative at Mercadien. I had a checklist of things going, oh, that's good. We did that. So one of the things that was really important to us at Mercadien was, we wanted to do it. Anything we do, we want to do well, right? That's all of us. Anything we do, we want to make sure we're putting the resources in, right? Ira mentions that, making sure the people that are on the committee, on the DE&I committee, actually have the resources available to them, but also senior management buy-in. So I'm a partner with the firm. So I'm co-leading our initiative with another partner at the firm who sits on the executive committee. So one of the first things we did was just making sure, do we have all of the partners buy-in, and are we all on the same page as far as, it's going to take resources, it's going to take time, commitment to do this right. And the other thing we really focused on is, measuring the type A CPAs that we are. We want to measure everything. We want to make sure, are we actually having an impact? So we're going to be doing a lot of pulse surveys. We're going to be tracking, all of any new initiative we take on, we're going to be tracking the impact of it. So we can really see everything that we're doing, is it having an impact? And the other thing we realized was, we need outside help. We hired a consultant because, sometimes you have to acknowledge this is complex. In order to do this right, maybe you do need external help. So that's one thing we've invested in and are learning. And I think this is a learning process. So there's a lot to it. I guess I do want to pause here. I want to make sure if there's any questions that anyone has, feel free to put it in the chat. We also believe there's a raise hand function, but maybe not. Let's just stick with the chat. So if there's any questions, feel free to put your questions in the chat for any of our presenters. And the one thing I guess I had, I was pondering was, Ira, you mentioned when you are creating a committee, it's important to have diversity on that actual committee. So what if we are working with a not-for-profit, maybe they don't have diversity to begin with, maybe it's very little. How do you balance that out between, targeting individuals who may be diverse versus asking for volunteers or voluntold? So how do you balance that out when you're creating a committee? And I guess the question's to any of you.
Well, one of the things you can look at is, who are you serving? Which groups are you associated with? And they may be able to provide you with that diversity that you're missing.
I just want to jump in there. We have one of our clients has a very large board. It is not a very diverse board, but they wanted to, this was one of their initiatives. They recognized it and wanted to change it. And they knew the struggle is when you go to someone to try to add them to your board and they look around the room and they see, nobody else here looks like me, and maybe this isn't something that they care about. So sometimes it's like convincing the people you want to actively recruit that this is important to you.
The other thing that you can do along those same lines is, who do you know that is either in that diverse group or is friendly with somebody in that diverse group and have them do the introduction for you. And as you know, there's a difference between a cold call, just reaching out and saying, hey, would you like to be on this board, versus somebody you know and trust saying, hey, I want you to meet this individual. They're really trying to get their act together. And I think you would be a great person to help them on this journey.
Great.
And to all the points, sort of, they feel like everyone hit on this, is the committees could be made up of other individuals who aren't necessarily, I mean, Iris said that with reaching out to your constituency. So the committee could be made up of other individuals, and maybe even, you know, that's where you said, Lovepreet, you guys are using a consultant, perhaps. Maybe the organization itself reaches out and has a consultant advise a committee that could then be made up of other people who are not necessarily part of the organization, but have some affiliation or want to support it.
Great. Very good. Any last thoughts from any of the presenters before we wrap up? Okay, well, we want to thank everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful afternoon. If you have any questions for any of us, our contact information is included. And thank you for joining. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.